There is a particular kind of quiet that arrives somewhere in the middle of life, uninvited, without any specific event to explain it. The career you work toward for years suddenly feels less like an identity and more like a costume. The opinions of people you once organized your entire life around begin to matter less, for reasons you cannot fully articulate. You are not in crisis, exactly. You are simply, quietly, no longer certain the life you built was actually chosen by you. Why does a life that once felt so deliberately assembled begin to feel, somewhere past 40, strangely unfamiliar? Why does the middle of life so often arrive not with celebration, but with an unexpected and unglamorous kind of reckoning? Before we explore this together, subscribe to this channel where we uncover the hidden psychology behind everyday life. Picture a house built rapidly, in your 20s and 30s, walls raised quickly, rooms furnished according to whatever seemed impressive or expected at the time, an entire structure completed before you had the perspective to know whether it actually suited you. For years, you lived inside it without question, too occupied with building to stop and ask whether the design reflected who you actually were. And then, one ordinary afternoon somewhere past 40, you notice, almost involuntarily, that several of these rooms no longer feel like yours at all. Carl Jung, who studied this exact period of life more closely than almost any psychologist before him, believed that the first half of life is spent building a persona, establishing a career, a family, a reputation, a coherent identity capable of functioning successfully in the world. But he also believed that somewhere in midlife, often without warning, the psyche begins demanding something different. Not further construction, but honest examination. What if the unease you're feeling is not a sign that something has gone wrong, but a sign that something essential has finally begun? Here is the psychological shift worth naming plainly. After 40, the questions that once felt urgent, how do I succeed? How do I get ahead? How do I prove myself, begin quietly giving way to a different, more uncomfortable set of questions. Not how do I get more, but is any of this actually mine? Not what should I achieve next, but who have I actually become while achieving everything so far? Why does this shift so often feel disorienting, even destabilizing, rather than simply reflective? Because for decades, most people organize their entire sense of self around external achievement, external approval, external evidence of a life well lived. Jung believed the first half of life is necessarily oriented outward, and necessarily so, since a stable persona and a functioning place in the world are genuinely required before deeper self-examination becomes possible. But once that outward structure has been sufficiently built, the psyche, almost on its own timeline, begins turning inward, asking questions the persona was never designed to answer. Consider how this often surfaces. A career, once a source of pride, that suddenly feels hollow despite continued external success. A marriage or long friendship, stable for years, that now requires an honesty neither party has practiced in some time. A quiet, persistent sense that time is no longer infinite, producing not panic exactly, but a new, sharper clarity about what actually matters and what was simply performed out of habit. Is this a crisis? Or is it, more accurately, an invitation arriving later than expected, but arriving nonetheless? Jung called this period, when it is engaged with honestly rather than avoided, one of the most important passages toward individuation, the long process of integrating the parts of yourself left unexamined during the busy work of the first half of life. The shadow, in particular, tends to surface more insistently in midlife, ambitions quietly buried in favor of practicality. desires set aside for the sake of stability, entire dimensions of the self postponed indefinitely under the assumption that there would always be more time later to attend to them. What if later has finally, quietly, arrived? Alfred Adler believed that much of early adulthood is organized around proving one's significance to others through achievement, through comparison, through the accumulation of external markers of success. But somewhere past 40, many people begin to notice that significance built entirely on comparison never actually produces the peace it promised. Is that realization a loss? Or is it simply the mind finally recognizing a strategy that was never going to work indefinitely? Picture the tree standing bare through winter, appearing from a distance like something finished, without depth. Beneath the surface, unseen, the roots continue their patient widening in the dark. Is the unfamiliar quiet of midlife truly emptiness? Or is it simply the visible surface of a self long dormant beneath decades of building, finally beginning to grow in a direction it was never previously given room to take? This is the turn worth making gently here. The discomfort so often associated with this period, the restlessness, the reevaluation, the sudden uncertainty about choices once considered settled, is not evidence of failure. It may be the clearest evidence yet of a psyche finally ready for its next stage of development. Individuation at this age rarely feels graceful while it is happening. It tends to feel, initially, like loss. Only later does it begin to feel like the truest kind of arrival. So how do you actually move through a shift this disorienting? This is where the observer becomes essential, the quiet witness inside you capable of noticing unfamiliar restlessness without immediately needing to resolve it through a dramatic decision. Not the part of you that reacts impulsively to sudden dissatisfaction. The part that can simply notice, calmly, something in me is questioning a life I built carefully. And this questioning deserves patience rather than panic. Seneca, writing extensively about the passage of time, believed that many people arrive at midlife only to realize they had been so occupied with living that they never paused to examine whether they were living well. Can you sit with the discomfort of that recognition without rushing to fix it in a single dramatic gesture? Can you allow the questions themselves to exist for a while without demanding immediate answers? And here is something worth noticing. If you look honestly, variations of this exact reckoning have likely surfaced before, in smaller forms, at earlier points in your life, moments of quiet doubt quickly buried beneath the next obligation, the next milestone, the next reasonable excuse to postpone the deeper questions a little longer. Why does life seem to keep returning you to this same threshold in different disguises until you are finally ready to walk through it rather than around it? Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious in us tends to reappear in our lives as pattern, as recurring invitation, until it is finally met directly rather than deferred once again. Perhaps this current unease is not simply about turning 40 or 50 or any particular number at all. Perhaps it is the latest and possibly final version of a question you have been quietly postponing for years. Have you been building a life or performing one? Viktor Frankl believed that between what happens to a person and how they respond, a space exists narrow, but entirely their own. You cannot control the passage of time or the fact that certain questions tend to surface more insistently in midlife than they did in youth. But the space between noticing these questions and choosing, finally, to engage with them honestly, that space belongs entirely to you. So what does this shift actually look like? practiced in ordinary, undramatic ways, not a sudden abandonment of every responsibility you have built, not a single reckless decision meant to prove you are still capable of change. It might look like choosing honesty in a long relationship, even when honesty disrupts a comfortable, practice silence. It might look like reconsidering a career built on impressing others and asking, perhaps for the first time, whether it still reflects who you actually want to be. It might look like sitting alone in a quiet room and realizing the solitude no longer feels like something to escape. It might look like choosing depth over further accumulation, fewer commitments, examined more honestly rather than more achievements collected without reflection. None of this arrives with fanfare. Jung once suggested that people will do almost anything to avoid the discomfort of genuine self-examination, and if that is true, then simply allowing these questions to surface honestly in the middle of an already full life may already be one of the more significant acts of courage a person can undertake. Return for a moment to that house built quickly in the earlier decades of your life. Imagine walking through it again now, slower this time, asking of each room a simple, honest question. Did I choose this because it was truly mine, or because it seemed, at the time, like what a life was supposed to look like? You do not need to rebuild the entire house at once. You only need to begin noticing, room by room, which parts of it were ever actually yours to begin with. And so we return to the question beneath this entire shift, beneath every reconsidered ambition, every quiet doubt about a life once considered settled. What actually remains of you once the achievements, the comparisons, and the carefully built persona of the first half of life are finally set down for honest examination? What remains when the performance quiets and only the self underneath it is left standing? Jung offered an answer that has outlasted him by nearly a century. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps the unease that arrives somewhere past 40 was never a sign that your life had gone wrong. Perhaps it was simply life itself, patiently waiting until you finally had enough perspective to ask the questions that matter most. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel and join us as we keep uncovering these hidden truths. What is one question about your own life you are only now beginning to ask honestly? Write it in the comments below, and let that house, wherever it stands in you, finally be examined room by room.